Malcolm X rose to prominence as the minister of Harlem, New York, Harlem's renowned Temple No. 7 back in 1954. And he rejected integration and argued that struggles for liberation were never nonviolent but based on bloodshed. He was assassinated in 1965. And you read about him in your reading for class, but I want to talk about some of the basic tenets of Malcolm X's perspective. One, he emphasized that Christianity had been used as a tool in the hands of whites, as a tool of oppression. Second, he emphasized that religions should be socially responsible. In that way, he is very much similar to Martin Luther King, that religion should be an instrument of social change, justice, and that practitioners of any religion should be makers of history, should be improving the world and not just witnesses of history and being passive. He believed in human interests as opposed to the interest of a few. He believed in emphasizing the needs and concerns of the masses of people, not just the interest of a few. And he believed that a religion should identify with the needs and the interests of the masses. He also believed that self-defense was a moral obligation. He believed that self-defense was intelligent, right, and that it was a responsibility. He did not advocate for Black people being the aggressive. He never advocated for Black people initiating violence. He believed that Black people should defend themselves where the government failed to defend them. And he believed that people who defended themselves were in the favor of God. And he believed that the study of history was key for Black people. He believed that history would lead to the unification of Black people and oppressed people, and that knowledge of history would help people to move intelligently in the present. Yeah, and these were some of the basic beliefs of Malcolm X, and I just want to play a short video.
I would like to make a few comments concerning the difference between the Black Revolution and the Negro Revolution. There's a difference. Are they both the same? And if they're not, what is the difference? What is the difference between a Black Revolution and a Negro Revolution? First, what is a revolution? Sometimes I'm inclined to believe that many of our people are using this word revolution loosely, without taking careful consideration what this word actually means and what its historic characteristics are. When you study the historic nature of revolutions, the motive of a revolution, the objective of a revolution, and the result of a revolution, and the methods used in a revolution, you may change words. You may devise another program. You may change your goal, and you may change your mind. Look at the American Revolution in 1776. That revolution was for what? For land. How was it? Why did they want land? Independence. How was it carried out? Bloodshed. Number one, it was based on land, the basis of independence. And the only way they could get it was bloodshed. The French Revolution, what was it based on? The landless against the landlord. What was it for? Land. How did they get it? Bloodshed. Was no love lost. Was no compromise. Was no negotiation. I'm telling you, you don't know what a revolution is. Because when you find out what it is, you'll get back in the alley. You'll get out of the way. Come on. The Russian Revolution. What was it based on? Land. The landless against the landlord. How did they bring it about? Bloodshed. You haven't got a revolution that doesn't involve bloodshed. And you're afraid to bleed. I say if you're afraid to bleed, long as the white man sent you to Korea, you bled. He sent you to Germany, you bled. He sent you to the South Pacific to fight the Japanese, you bled. You bleed for white people. But when it comes time to seeing your own churches being bombed and little black girls murdered, you haven't got no blood. You bleed when the white man says bleed. You bite when the white man says bite. And you bark when the white man says bark. I hate to say this about us, but it's true. How you going to be nonviolent in Mississippi as violent as you were in Korea? How can you justify being nonviolent in Mississippi and Alabama when your churches are being bombed and your little girls are being murdered, and at the same time you're going to get violent with Hitler and Tojo and somebody else that you don't even know? If violence is wrong in America, violence is wrong abroad. If it's wrong to be violent, defending black women and black children and black babies and black men, then it's wrong for America to draft us and make us violent abroad in defense of her. And if it is right for America to draft us and teach us how to be violent in defense of her, then it is right for you and me to do whatever is necessary to defend our own people right here in this country. I would like.
So now, Robert Williams is someone you also read about in your readings, and he was a former NAACP member and became a member of the Deacons of Defense in Louisiana, and they were formed in 1964 by Black World War II veterans, and they got together to protect the civil rights of workers and to protect Black people carrying out their civil rights and privileges like voting. And it was also the SNCC that would eventually take lead of the civil rights movement and begin to focus on Black power. Stokely Carmichael founded the Lowndes County Freedom Organization and moved the SNCC, SNCC, toward the philosophy of Black nationalism. And he removed many whites from their positions in SNCC. And during the 1966 March Against Fear in Tennessee to Jackson, Mississippi, James Meredith was shot, Black man. And after this incident, Stokely Carmichael stepped in to finish the march and begin to talk more aggressively about Black power. And many of the participants in the civil rights movement were increasingly questioning the traditional strategies, especially nonviolence, in the face of the increasing state-sanctioned violence of white terrorist groups in the South and state-sanctioned violence in the form of unchecked police brutality inflicted on the civil rights workers and protesters and ordinary Black citizens. In the Black Power movement, Black Power was both a concept and a movement, or an era. In fact, the age group that would eventually advocate for the creation of Black studies, Pan-African studies all over the country, were the children of Black people who had fought in World War II. Many of them were, and returned home much more demanding of fair treatment. So Maulana Karenga places the beginning of the Black Power movement. Okay. But Karenga places the beginning of the Black Power movement in 1965 with the rebellion that took place in the Watts section of Los Angeles. It was a rejection of the things that the civil rights movement was not addressing. Watts was 98% Black at the time, and it suffered from a number of issues, including overcrowding, unemployment, unfair housing practices. The employment rate in Watts was 30% at the time. There was lack of health care, there was lack of public transportation, neglect of Black communities, crime and drugs, which is typically found in places that lack jobs and basic social services. And the added element of police brutality pushed things over the edge, and the riot started when a Black man was pulled over for drunk driving, and people began to attack the police, and the entirety of Watts was in rebellion in just a few hours. It lasted 4 days, and when it was over, 34 people were killed, 900 were injured, and 4,000 were arrested. Jimmy Garrett, who was one of the student leaders at San Francisco State University, San Francisco State College at the time, he was actually in Watts at the time of the riot. And similar riots took place in Detroit, New Jersey, and Chicago. And President Nixon established the National Advisory Council on Civil Disorders. And it was headed by an Illinois governor named Otto Kerner. It was called the Kerner Commission. And they studied the conditions that led to these riots, and they came to the conclusion that white racism was the underlying cause of the rebellions, and that it would eventually lead to two societies, one Black and one white. And these conditions and new challenges gave rise to the emergence of the call for Black Power, which was the idea that Black people needed to be able to take control of their own destiny and make everything in their lives relevant to improving the conditions of the Black community, to have the ability to defend the Black community against forces, economic, political, and social, that undermine the Black community, and securing the power needed to improve the conditions in the Black community. So Black Power called for independent Black political and economic power, and it's this ethos that had also emerged on college campuses across the country. This is a short video on the Watts riot. I think this one's not working. I will attach it later. So Black Power, in the words of Kwame Ture said that Black Power is a call for Black people in this country to unite, to recognize their heritage, to build a sense of community. It's a call for Black people to begin to define their own goals and to lead their own organization. It's a call to reject the racist institutions and values of this society. There were several key events that led to Black Power that we have discussed in class. We've discussed in this class and also have been discussing the readings, and that's the Montgomery church bombing, the assassination of Malcolm X, which took place in 1965, February. And just the next month, Bloody Sunday took place, and we watched the video on that. All of these things were key events that shaped the emergence of this idea of Black Power and the popularity of Black Power among Black people. The Black Panther Party started in 1966 in Oakland, based on self-defense and self-determination. Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton were the founders of the Black Panther Party, which was named after the emblem of the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, which was started by Stokely Carmichael. Their emblem was a Black Panther. So the Black Panther Party had mixed Black nationalism with Marxist-Leninist ideology. Okay, and of course, Marxist-Leninist ideology was about a country the ideology of having a country ruled by the working class. So they mixed this class-based ideology with Black nationalism and also the emphasis on overthrowing capitalism and ending police brutality, and also providing basic services to the Black community. Is a short video on that.
The Panthers called themselves a revolutionary organization. The 10-point program was their blueprint for change.
And we wrote out this program. We want power to determine our own destiny in our own Black community. Immediate end to police brutality and murder of Black people was point number 7. The right to have juries of our peers in the courts, what have you. We summed it up. We wanted land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace.
The Black Panthers distributed free food and later developed a free breakfast program for children.
Good morning. Good morning. I can't hear you. Good morning. Good morning. Black is beautiful. Free to it. Said I want you free. Free to it. Black is beautiful. Free to it. Said I want you free. Free to it. Black is beautiful. Free to it.
The idea was obviously twofold, for the specific purpose of serving those people who were directly benefited by our programs, but also secondarily to influence the minds of people to understand not only that the Black Panther Party was providing them this, but more importantly that if they could get food, that maybe they would want clothing, and maybe they want housing, and maybe they'd want land, and maybe they would ultimately want some abstract thing called freedom.
Okay, and that's just a little bit about the social programs that they were involved in. Now, the anti-war movement, the United States had entered into a war in Vietnam, and there was an incident that precipitated it. There was the Gulf of Tonkin incident that showed radar images that supposedly showed an attack on a United States vessel. And those images, some people claim that they were false images. However, the anti-war movement was started by white leftist students, specifically an organization called the Students for Democratic Society, who were in large part inspired by the Civil Rights Movement. The anti-war movement came from the fact that President Lyndon B. Johnson escalated a war against communism in Vietnam in the mid-60s, when many Americans were not convinced that it was a necessary war. So many people considered it an unjust war, and it was more expensive in terms of money and lives than expected. As a result of this war, many of the domestic concerns of the country and the civil rights concerns in the country, they took a back seat to the war. And all of this combined to cause people to have serious doubt in the credibility of the United States government. When it came to Black people, African Americans had traditionally represented 10% of the US military. But when it came to the war in Vietnam, Black people were deployed disproportionate to their percentage of the US population. In fact, the US government launched a program called Project 100,000 to increase the number of African American recruits in the war. And as a result, African Americans ended up representing 25% of those deployed for the war in Vietnam. And in addition, Black people saw disproportionately more frontline combat than other soldiers. And as a result, they absorbed a disproportionate amount of the casualties. So Vietnam was referred to by many as a white man's war, but a Black man's fight. So African Americans opposed the Vietnam War for several reasons. Okay. In 1967, Muhammad Ali refused to be drafted to fight in Vietnam. And let me show a little bit about that.
Ali defeated Foley by a knockout in the 7th round. Immediately thereafter, he walked into the teeth of a monumental decision. He was drafted, and then he refused induction on the grounds of his religious convictions on war.
My conscience won't let me go shoot my brother or some darker people or some poor hungry people in the mud for big powerful America and shoot them for what? They never called me nigger. They never lynched me. They never put no dogs on me. They never robbed me of my nationality, raped and killed my mother and father. Well, I'm going to shoot them for what? How am I going to shoot them? Them little poor little black people, little babies and children and women. How can I shoot them poor people? Just take me to jail.
While fighting imprisonment for his stand, Ali was also stripped of his title, denied a license to fight in the United States, and denied a visa to go overseas to fight. He was in a much tighter financial bind than most were aware of.
I want to see the world heavyweight champion driving the Volkswagen, guys in the Cadillacs and making fun of you. So I'm working today, I'm hauling, right? And so one day I had to speak at Canisius. Heard of Canisius? Canisius, Fairleigh Dickinson, C.W. Post. 3 colleges at $1,500 a college. Pretty good money. So I broke my wife's piggy bank. She had about $35 in it. I broke $135. I broke the piggy bank to get gas money to get me to the college. And I got enough gas and food money to get the $4,500, the $1,500 lecture. At $45 would hold me, pay gas bills, light bills, till I get to the next college. This went on until the whole mess was over.
Inevitably, students would challenge Ali on his stand and his convictions. Remarkably, Ali more than held his own against students who had a far better formal education than he.
I'm saying you talking about me about some draft, and all of you white boys are breaking your neck to get to Switzerland and Canada and London. I'm not going to help nobody get something my Negroes don't have. If I'm going to die, I'll die now, right here fighting you. If I'm going to die, you my enemy. My enemy is the white people, not Vietcong's or Chinese or Japanese. You my opposer when I want freedom. You my opposer when I want justice. You my opposer when I want equality. You won't even stand up for me in America for my religious beliefs, and you want me to go somewhere and fight, but you won't even stand up for me here at home.
Okay. So, black people were opposed to the Vietnam War because the government was against third world liberation movements in general, and the Vietnamese in particular. And the threat of being drafted that many young black people faced was disproportionate, and they were vulnerable to being drafted because many of them were not protected by student deferment. Also, they were fighting in a war on behalf of a nation who denied them freedom at home. So black people who were drafted were being expected to fight for so-called freedom abroad when they didn't enjoy social and political freedom right here in the United States. During the same time, we have the emergence of Black studies, Pan-African studies, or Africana studies as it's also known. And in 1966, one of the students in the Negro Student Association, okay, it was once called the Negro Student Association, Jimmy Garrett, who was in the Watts riot, who was around, during the Watts riot in Watts, a student at the time at San Francisco State, had campaigned to change the name of the Negro Students Association to the Black Student Union. And he was successful. And San Francisco State had the first Black student union in the country. And their numbers grew to 100 members. The term Black was more associated with Black power, culture, identity, and pride than the term Negro at the time. And Black students in San Francisco State had been reading the ideas of Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, and they were studying them with one another. They were so schooled in this Black studies scholarship that they began to challenge the ideas of their teachers and the racist assumptions of their interpretations of history. And in the same vein, the students began to demand Black studies courses that reflected their own social, political reality and their own contributions to society and Black people's contributions to human civilization. They were demanding to have classes on Black history, culture, literature, and art as an alternative to the Eurocentric curriculum that had characterized the majority of the university curriculum. And essentially, they were asking for a more democratic form of education in the country. Instead of an education that required them to check their culture and their identity at the door, and their history at the door. So Black students made these demands along with the demand for more full-time teachers at San Francisco, full-time Black teachers at San Francisco State. In fact, they specifically chose a man named Nathan Hare, who was a Black nationalist teacher from Howard University, and this is who they wanted to eventually head the Black Studies department. In the meantime, the students ran what was known as the experimental college program, in which they got community leaders to teach classes, community members and the students themselves, and they provided youth in the community with tutoring. And because the money to run this program and some other Black student community service projects was coming from the Students Association budget, many of the white students protested the fact that Black students used the funds for their community projects. Okay, so they were in an environment that encouraged struggle at the time in the 1960s. Okay, so they demanded a department. They demanded 20 full-time teachers, but what they got was 12 full-time professors in their Black Studies department. They wanted the authority to grant bachelor's degrees, and they got that, and the right to hire and fire, which they won. They got the admittance of 120 Black students and a considerable increase in Black students for the next fall semester because the strike ended in the spring of '69. And they got a new administrative position, a co-director of financial aid, to meet the needs of Black students. And they wanted amnesty for 100% of students who were arrested during their strike for Black studies and a College of Ethnic Studies. But they got 90% because some students who were convicted or arrested for more serious crimes, property crimes, were not given amnesty. And they won the development of a College of Ethnic Studies, which included Raza Studies, Asian American Studies, Native American Studies, and Third World Studies. During the time, I want to talk about the environment of the time, the socio-political climate of the time. But to begin, I want to play a recording from Malcolm X. And in this recording, Malcolm X is referring to what shapes a climate. He's talking about the emergence of the Nation of Islam in the 1960s and why it became so popular in the 1960s when it was established as early as the 1930s.
Let me return to the Nation of Islam per se, Minister, by raising a question which struck me as a result of reading some of Baldwin's work, namely The Fire Next Time. Baldwin pointed out that in Harlem for many years he had passed the street corners and the soapboxes and heard people speaking from these platforms who were known as Black nationalists, and nobody was listening. And he said all of a sudden he realized that people were beginning to listen to the Muslim speakers on the street corners in Harlem. The message essentially was the same, but it was that now many people were listening to what this message was. And you pointed out that the Nation of Islam has been in the picture for about 33 years. What is it, in your judgment, that has caused this tremendous amount of support that the Nation of Islam has garnered in the Negro community in, say, the last 10 years?
When you put a seed in the soil, it remains beneath the soil until the season changes. And when the season changes, the seasonal change automatically brings about rather atmospheric conditions, bring about a seasonal change that makes that seed come up or crop grow in its appointed time. And all over this world today, God himself has brought about political changes, a political atmosphere, sociological, social atmosphere, economic atmosphere. These economic conditions, these political conditions and social conditions combine to bring about a situation that is making Black people in America more receptive, their mind more fertile to the seed of truth that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has been planting for 30-some years. And this is springing up today and causing our people to see and understand now what they couldn't see and understand before.
So what were the factors? Malcolm X talked about these social political factors. The factors during this time that shaped the consciousness, that shaped the thinking of Black students around the country was the civil rights movement. There was also the free speech movement, which advocated for students' rights to advocate for civil rights issues on college campuses, to raise money for issues on college campuses, to gather in advocacy for social justice and civil rights issues on college campuses. Also, there was the anti-Vietnam War movement, and there was the Black Power movement. All of these things had an influence on this time period, and it shaped, it radicalized, it politicized Black students' thinking and caused the seed of Black studies to grow in the minds of students around the country. Okay, so the students, Black students around the country, took Black power, self-determination, and the Nation of Islam notion of do for self to heart. And they were doing everything they felt needed to be done. They felt healthcare was a problem in their community, so they developed work study in healthcare clinics. They felt education was lacking in their community, so they tutored Black students in their community, in their community, and developed after-school programs. Okay, they developed the confidence that was not given to them by the university and that the university could not take away. They developed leadership that was not incubated by these mainstream societies and institutions. Therefore, their goals and their methods were not consistent with the goals of these mainstream institutions. They developed a love for Black communities, not because the Black community was perfect, but because they came from it and they understood it and they were proud of it and they wanted to change it and make it into what it should be. They were not trying to transcend it in the sense of getting away from it. They wanted to use their energy to transform their communities. The ideology of trying to get out of the hood is a kind of a reduction of the goals of this generation in the 1960s. Many of them may have wanted to get out of the hood, so to speak, but it was so that they could help it. And it was, it's confusing the means by which they struggle with the ends for which they struggle. Their objective was to advance Black communities, advance their communities and underserved communities. And as a result of the programs they ran, they gained confidence. They were providing services that people needed. They felt that they were making necessary contributions for society. They felt legitimate value necessary, and they had confidence, and they gained those things outside of the institution society had made. So they were valued by people that society didn't value. They were legitimized by organizations and institutions like the Black Panther Party, which were outside of mainstream institutions. And that made them a breath of fresh air to many because they filled in a void or a vacuum that the community needed to fill. And they were a formidable threat to the status quo. And those who had a stake in the status quo, or those who were served well by the status quo, they viewed power differently. Instead of seeing power of institutions, they saw themselves as the only legitimate source of power. And after all, they were the consumers, and this was a public institution. So the Black students at San Francisco State, students on campus, were facing other problems as well. In 1965, San Francisco State decided to create new SAT requirements, the requirements that for students applying for admission into the state colleges, and they'd have to score in the top third of their graduating classes. And policies like these reduced the number of Black students who were able to attend. So this is why they made that demand, and they achieved that demand for increasing the number of Black students on campus. Okay. On campus were students like the Students for Democratic Society, who were against the war, against the bombing of Vietnamese people, who were at odds with the United States. They were against the Selective Service office on campus. They demanded that the college end the practice of providing students' names to Selective Service officers. Okay, so they got the majority of their demands due to the strike for Black Studies that took place in 1968. And this achievement set a precedent for Black students across the country. Also in 1968, the students shut down the campuses at Columbia University, at Yale, and at Cornell University. Maulana Karenga defines art as cultural production that's informed by the standards of creativity, standards of beauty, and inspired by and reflective of a people's life experiences and their life aspirations. So Black art then is the conscious and the unconscious aesthetic contribution of Black people to their struggle to rescue and to reconstruct their history and humanity in their own image, interest. So art is essentially a people's cultural production that represents their standards of creativity, their standards of beauty, their life experiences, aspirations, their imaginations. When we study African art, one of the characteristics of African art is that much of it tends to be perishable, and much of it can wear away. And that's because the functionality of some African art is built with the intention of functionality. Not all, of course, but some. And in rituals and ceremonies, they're useful and functional, and they're also beautiful. And the reason for this is because there's much more emphasis on process in art, the experience of art, instead of the isolated objects produced themselves. Aesthetics is a little bit different. The concept of aesthetics is different from that of art. It's the philosophy of values, emotion, and artistic expression. It's the standards by which a people assign value to their cultural products. So many argue that we're surrounded by images of European greatness, European conquest in the form of street names and school names, statues, holidays, and names, and most importantly, European conceptualizations of what beautiful is. And the European aesthetic places a lot more emphasis on aesthetics in a rational sense than is found in African aesthetics, or according to some African philosophers. African art, although many African ethnic groups do not have indigenous words that represent aesthetics, you know, this philosophy of beautiful standards by which a culture assigns value or beauty to products. African ethnic groups do express their value, and in that value has traditionally been social and spiritual criteria. African art places a lot more emphasis on spirituality in its artistic production, and also a lot more emphasis on functional value, according to Marimba Ani. And Marimba Ani is the author of a book called Urugu that you can look into if you're more interested in learning more about this this particular perspective. According to her, in most cases, it's a common feature is that it expresses the relationship. African art is that it expresses the relationship between human beings and the creator. In many cases, African art represents an attempt or attempts to give physical form to spiritual meaning. And according to Ani, remember Ani, Western society tends to place more emphasis on the technical means of artistic production and the creation of art for commercial products and purposes and produced for consumption as opposed to having a social function. And this is kind of her idea of like what some of the differences, the unique features of African aesthetics, that it emphasizes spontaneity more than Western society does. Spirituality and social function more. So there is an argument over whether or not art has a social political purpose, whether it should speak to people's social, spiritual, and political needs, or whether art should not be held to standards, or whether art resists the notion of having standards of production, that arts should have responsibility, social responsibility, that it should inform, that it should inspire people. Think of where you stand on that question. Should art have standards? Should art be held to social political standards? Or should it be free of standards, free of expectations? There's often almost most classes that I teach are split down the middle on that issue. I want to talk to you all about the Black Arts movement in particular, because the Black Arts movement was very, very clear on this question. Between 1965 and 75, it's said to have begun the opening of the Black Repertory Theater by Amiri Baraka. You know, Baraka opens this Black Repertory Theater in 1965, and it's thought of as the beginning of the Black Arts movement. And the philosophy of the Black Arts movement was that Black art needed to speak to the feelings, to the experiences of Black people, but it should be political, it should be liberatory. And it considered itself an expressive dimension of the Black Power movement, unlike the Harlem Renaissance. Unlike the Harlem Renaissance, the Black Arts movement was disconnected from white funding. You know, white philanthropists funded many of the musicians and artists and writers, particularly the writers in the Harlem Renaissance. That was definitely not the case during the Black Arts movement. It was disconnected from white funding. There was less of an attempt to appease or appeal to white readers during the Black Arts movement.